Hello and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor Podcast. Today my guest is Ryan Burman. He's the founder of Pitch to Procure. And the theme is procurement is not your enemy, but bad selling is. So what I see too often is sellers fear procurement. And I think often they don't understand what procurement is trying to protect. Can we explore that for a bit?
Sure. Yeah, so from a procurement standpoint, and it kind of goes in two different ways. I want to make sure we understand there are your transactional buyers, just like there are your transactional sellers. I think in this case, so we are working on a common denominator. We're not talking about a transactional buyer or seller. We're talking about where you're really talking about the full dynamic of a product or service that you're trying to procure or sell. I mean, at the end of the day, procurement is just trying to protect and minimize risk to the company, right? We're trying to maximize the value add, and we're trying to maintain predictability for the company. Like sales, procurement also has budgets. We have spend analysis. We have all that good, data that we all lean on that we're kind of judged by, right? So we need to keep that predictable, and we need to keep the ebbs and flows and the ship steady as much as possible. And that's basically the end game.
So in summary, it's not buyer versus seller, it's risk versus recklessness.
I think you can say that. It really isn't. And like you said in the beginning, it isn't buyer versus seller. We are an extension of each other's brand, right? How well you perform as a seller or supplier is a direct correlation to how good I am as a buyer, right? And how I can help you from a selling standpoint, forecasting or whatever it is, makes you look better as a salesperson, because the less time you have to spend with me, and I mean this on a good note, the more revenue you generate for your company, right? And when I mean spend, I mean like reworks or miscommunication or things like that. I'm not talking about you as a seller per se, but I'm just talking about holistically the company.
Right.
When that is clear, you're not having to touch a product as much, which generates revenue for you guys.
Well, where I'd like this conversation to end up is clarity on how to de-risk decisions and how procurement and other buyers have to sell internally when the vendor isn't present or the salesperson isn't present, and how to build vendor partnerships for life. So that's really the direction I want to take the conversation. So let's explore the idea that we're on the same team. First of all, what's your response to that?
As a buyer, and again, me as a person, not every buyer is like this, right? But for me, my goal is to put you on a path to success. I want to set the expectation. I want to set the tone. And I want you to I want you to work in a space that is a no-no versus assumptions and anticipation. And to me, that's my fiduciary responsibility to you. Because if I put you on that path, you're going to know what I need. You're going to be able to explain what I need. And then that helps me then sell to my internal stakeholders. Once that trust develops, then I will slowly introduce you to people internally so you can further extend the conversation. Because obviously knowledge is power, right? So the more people you get to infiltrate into our company, my company, the better you are, because you're building your network, one, but then you're having firsthand conversations with stakeholders that also have impact or the responsibility to our customer and our consumer. And that's just as important. But the procurement buyer needs to be, to me, the funnel, the facilitator of that, to make sure that the narrative is controlled and it's understood.
So if we take this a little bit further, there are a number of key stakeholders that we have to engage with. There's the problem owner, there's the outcome owner, there's the process owner, there's the risk avoider, and normally we will try and develop sponsors and champions, but there are also invisible influencers that we need to engage with. And the way I look at procurement is that if you develop good relationships with procurement, they can give you the keys to the hen house. If you don't, they can block you. Yep. What causes you as a buyer to resist creating introductions to salespeople? What are the sales behaviors that really piss you off?
Yeah, so it's all about seller intent in my eyes, and the authenticity of a seller, and just a general perception of the product and services that they're selling, right? So first of all, if you're a seller and your products and services just don't align for whatever reason, that could block you, first of all, and it's out of your control. I mean, at that point, it's up to the company, right?
Well, you should be qualifying yourself
So
out by that point.
from a personality standpoint, if I realize that your intent, your ego, you're not selling for the right reasons, you're not in the present, you're trying to just check several boxes, you're not having genuine conversations, all those reasons are what I look for, right? I'm not going to introduce an argumentative person to my stakeholders. Defensiveness doesn't come across, ego doesn't come across, being a salesperson comes across the wrong way. Those are the things where I tend to kind of push back, or I try to coach and get them in a different mindset if I do like the product.
What I'm hearing is that as a buyer, you're conscious of political and reputational risk, but you're also conscious that if you introduce the wrong person, not only could that harm you, but it could be a massive waste of critical resources, time. And you're effectively going to gatekeep at that point. So to build on your earlier question, I'm really curious. First of all, one of my observations is that procurement and sales within the same organization almost never cooperate, and salespeople don't role play with buyers. They tend to role play, and it's seller to seller theater. And I think that's a huge missed opportunity. What advice would you give to CROs, VPs of sales, sales managers to utilize the procurement that they have within their own organization?
So I want to go back because you made a really good point, and I'll get to your second question is the reason why I do what I do is because when things are going good, it's great. But for me, the seller and the company that the seller represents, it's what happens when things go wrong. How are you holding yourself accountable, assuming you're the one that created the problem? That's what I'm trying to get to. That's the authenticity that needs to come out from the seller for me to introduce them to the stakeholders. Answer your second question. What I'm seeing, or what I've seen over the last 18 years, and LinkedIn kind of amplifies this, is there's two different ecosystems. There's the kind of the procurement ecosystem, and then there's the seller's ecosystem. You see that in the corporate world too. Sellers hang around sellers, buyers hang around buyers. We all kind of hang around our own department, right? It's our comfort zone, right? And that's, to your point, what I would personally challenge, because once I got to understand and to empathize salespeople, that's when my mindset started changing. I started sitting next to the internal salespeople, understanding them, listening to them, understanding our customers, our consumers, and realizing we're all in it for the same reason. And that should also extend out to a supplier. Again, and it's an extension of who we are, right? Our customers are touching your products firsthand, or possibly, or maybe even a service, a website, whatever. They're going through that experience. So as a buyer, having that 360 approach, understanding all your stakeholders, understanding what is driving it, what is motivating it, and what are the behaviors behind it, can help you leverage things the right way. And I don't mean leverage in a bad way, but leverage in how to talk to them, leverage in how to build that gap, and push the right narrative of where the company wants to go and where the customer expects us to go, or the consumer.
Well, you've touched on something that makes me think that in a sales organization that is heavily driven by activity metrics, the tendency is not to slow down and not to do the research. And I have a fundamental belief, certainly in anything that is, big 5-figure up to 10-figure deals. You have an obligation to show up and be, wherever possible, timely, but more than that, relevant and individually valuable to the person that you're contacting. And you have no right whatsoever to be practicing with your customer. The place to practice is elsewhere, and ideally in a safe environment where you can mess up and you can try different approaches, and so that you build the muscle memory in terms of how people respond, what works well, what doesn't, what advances. And I think one of the most important areas, which is woefully underdeveloped, is genuinely powerful discovery and qualification. We're in sales, traditionally, we are taught to rebut and handle objections. We're taught to try and control the sale. Now, I'm curious about your reaction. I mean, when was the last time you enjoyed being controlled, manipulated, lied to, put under pressure, handled, or important information that's material to the outcome that you're going to have to live with, omitted? Have any of those things ever made you feel safe or want to work with that person?
Short answer, Of course not. For that is, I want you to pivot from I'm here to sell me a pitch to, oh, this guy wants to collaborate and talk with me and have a conversation. So my goal is to distance you from your pitch because the pitch does nothing for me. I want to co-create something with you, and I want to use your resources to make that happen. A pitch is an assumption and anticipation. Co-creation, you're building it layer by layer. I'm understanding what your bread and butter is in your company, and I'm layering them on top of each other. When I'm done with that pie and all those layers, that's the total cost of ownership. And that's then what I take. I take that pie. I don't take it each individual layer. I don't take a piece of it. I take that pie and then sell it internally to my internal stakeholders. It's that process I bring you through versus traditionally sales comes in, they do a pitch. 9 times out of 10, they don't know what they're pitching. They understand their product, but they don't know what they're pitching or why they're there traditionally. And it's just a complete shot in the dark. And to elaborate on that further, and it's my biggest pet peeve is when suppliers don't even go through procurement, their buyer becomes a vice president of sales, legal, whoever other stakeholder. To me, it should be funneled through procurement. So that's my thing. That's what I learned over the last decade is to guide you guys, to help you guys, to put you on a path to succeed versus you playing in a kind of an unknown space.
Honestly, that's refreshing, but it's rare.
I don't disagree with that one bit.
Well, prove me wrong by all means, but
no, you're absolutely right, and yeah, you're absolutely right. But that's should be the buyer's role because when you know what you're selling me, you know what we're trying to create together. That's when the maturity happens. That's when things happen. That's when conversations don't stall out because the expectation is out there. It's known by both parties.
Well, I think that an analogy that I tend to use is you're on a bombing raid at night and procurement is flying over and they're seeing the bombs drop and there's a flash of light and a little pop. And these are all the centers of dissatisfaction. So strategic procurement is seeing the patterns and seeing how those individual centers of dissatisfaction are connected and interdependent. Tactical procurement has a tendency to be on the ground and they will hear a bomb explode next to them and they'll respond to that. But the reality is, when you're talking about your total cost of ownership theory, a business is an organism. It's connected through in the same way that a human body is. You've got organs, they're connected with tissue, connective tissue and a nervous system. And if one system, let's say your liver, is out of kilter, then other parts of your body will start to have to compensate and deteriorate. And the problem I see is that sellers tend to be focused on their quota, on the transaction, on not getting fired or put on a personal improvement plan, on getting enough money to pay for the kitchen, whatever it happens to be. But as a buyer, you have to live with the outcome of the decision for a long time afterwards. I don't tend to focus on the transactional, buying a Mars bar. It's buying something significant where 20,000 people might be affected. There could be 40 plus influencers and stakeholders involved in the decision. And the challenge here is for the seller to think beyond the transaction and recognize that if we take out SAP and we put a replacement in, that's a hell of a lot of upheaval. They're carrying massive risk. And one of the single biggest reasons why the pipeline tends to stall and deals tend to stall and you get ghosted is because that risk has been triggered in the buyer's mind. And they're thinking, well, what the hell, if I do buy this, what's going to happen after the sale? And we've got to get out of this mindset as sellers that you sell and run. The transaction is over when the money clears the bank. The sale is not over until the customer comes back and reports that they got the outcome that they intended when they made the investment.
But why is that? If you go back about a decade or so, or even further, right? We do all this stuff and we call it strategic sourcing, but at the end of the day, you as a seller, you're just filling out a freaking spreadsheet at the end of the day. Yeah, it might be a complex software system like SAP, or some kind of portal, but at the end of the day, it's a version of a spreadsheet. And that mindset, it creates a transactional mindset because now it's just a numbers game. It's what I can put on a sheet of paper. And I think the biggest pivotal point that I saw in the last decade is COVID. And I think this is a silver lining of COVID. Suppliers became the hammer and the buyers became the nail. It switched the dynamic because supply dropped and demand went up. And whenever that happens, the dynamic changes. Whenever we, the buyer, cannot bring in goods and products to service our customer, now our customer gets impacted and we don't bring in revenue. And the whole supply chain gets flipped upside down. And that's exactly what happened during COVID. And that's what kind of turned my thinking around is this is not a numbers game. This is not a spreadsheet. These are relationships. This is an extension of our brand. We need you, the seller, as much as they need us.
Yeah.
It's no longer you versus me. It's how we're going to make this thing right. You cannot put on a spreadsheet the relationship. You cannot read tone. You cannot read behaviors when you're reading a spreadsheet. You cannot read how you are going to meaning the seller, are going to react when the problem happens. It's two-dimensional, not three-dimensional. I don't have 20 suppliers I work with. I reduce it down to 2 or 3. And I push every single manager I work under to do that. I'm like, no, we're not going to farm this out to 20 suppliers because you cannot organically understand 20 different salespeople in their companies and make a true decision. You're going to tell me what top 3 companies that you want us to work for, and then that's who I want to target, and we'll figure out from there who we as a company through myself and our stakeholders, who's going to fit that application the best to move forward with the business.
Well, one of the reasons that I see salespeople go terribly adrift is that they fixate on ROI as a metric, which is an intellectual metric anyway, and it's a lagging indicator. I think things like being on time and delivering in full, continuity of supply, lead time, expediting effectively, and the frequency of how you expedite, quality. These are all factors that matter way more, and they're all
total cost of ownership.
Factors.
Total cost of ownership. That's exactly what you described.
So we've got to get away from this idea that money is the driving factor. Yes, it's important.
Yeah.
And if they don't have any, you're not going to make a sale. But tell me your JCB story, because that's an interesting one. Or the forklifts.
The forklifts. Yeah. So I was at a company, our financials were not that great. We didn't really have money to spend, but we had an operation that we had to take care of. So traditionally what they would do is they would go buy forklifts, used, beat up, and they would rig them out to make them work. So when I came on board, my boss wanted to go to one OEM. So all of a sudden, the Cadillac of the forklifts called me and said, hey, can we kind of talk about this for a second? And I said, there's no way. It is a dealership of them. I said, I'm dealing directly with the OEM and not just a dealership. You're not even on a level playing field. Again, setting the dynamics for them. So eventually we got directly to the OEM. So now I'm talking with 2 different OEMs and their dealerships. So now I just leveled out that playing field. So it went back and forth. And after I looked at the total cost of service, how much it costs to repair a unit, the amount of available parts, all that stuff to reduce downtimes. The more expensive OEM, even though the purchase price was higher, the residual value, the interest rate, over time, it became less expensive. The total cost of ownership outweighed the price itself. And when I sold that, I went through the total cost of ownership. The price was on the screen. Yes, it was there on a spreadsheet, but it was the last thing that the stakeholders saw. So by the time I got to the price, it looked insignificant, even though it might have been more expensive than its competitor, because the perception and the weight of the total cost of ownership, it just made it look insignificant. And it was an easy sell internally. And then after that, just like what we were talking about before, is then I started to introduce that OEM to different, or its dealerships, to different operations people, so they could understand even a better picture of what we needed. So that's why it wasn't our ROI. There was no return on our investment. It was indirect. There was a return in terms of efficiency, but that wasn't measured. How
big was the order?
Do what?
How big was the order?
In the first year I was there, we purchased over between 50 to 60 units. You're talking about millions of dollars in sales.
Well, buyers don't wake up wanting a cheaper supplier necessarily. They wake up wanting fewer surprises, fewer escalations, fewer political landmines and career-threatening incidents, and fewer 2 a.m. emails. And reliability proves competence. Governance protects careers, and responsiveness builds safety. And if we're not factoring those into our discussions with our buyers, then we're going to find ourselves, like most people do, with 60% plus of our active pipeline that is in our ideal customer profile and our serviceable obtainable market in stalls. Now, you have to hit your number. So the mistake you're making by not factoring in and doing your research and prepping and having these difficult conversations up front is you create a pipeline drain, which means that you do need to have 3x pipeline coverage instead of 1.2 or 1.3. And if you look at what the conversion rate is of lead to marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead to meeting and then prematurely demoing and then writing a proposal and then conversion rate to proposal, then getting it through legal and procurement and IT and security, you're creating a rod for your own back. So what Ryan is proposing actually is be a grown-up about it and have the difficult conversations up front. Don't try and avoid your responsibility because your customer deserves better than you turning up and just trying to peddle them product. They're not really interested in the ROI. They say they are, but that comes at the end once you've tackled all the other risk factors. And if you fail to do that, you will create pipeline stall. Your forecast will be inaccurate. You will come in under quota. You will find yourself with 11th hour stalls or cancellations of orders. And if the first use does not exactly match the expectation that the buyer has, no worse and no better, then you're in trouble again because you will create anticipated or real buyer's remorse. If you come in 6 weeks early, that can create a whole slew of problems for operations. So don't try and underpromise and overdeliver. Try and work out what it actually looks like and give yourself a little bit of contingency and then deliver on your promises. Because I think consistency, reliability, integrity, these are all factors that make for a long-term relationship. And you have a fighting chance of creating a customer for life instead of having to go out and find more every month.
Yeah, and I would add that's the biggest thing is a lot of this is the big probably to answer your earlier question, this is probably the biggest mistake I see sellers make. They try to be that one fit, I can sell all to you. Either I can do it or I know the people that can do it. And when people kind of come in, hey, I can do it all mentality as a salesperson, that puts up like 5,000 red flags in your head. There's no one company that can practically do it all from a B2B standpoint, right? So it come in narrowed scope, understand what you do, understand your differentiators, and then co-create with the buyer from there. Because then you're putting yourself in a position to be successful.
What are 3 questions that you would always ask and want to get the answer to before you would ever be comfortable recommending a supplier to your internal customers?
So it really depends on the application. What are we talking about? The 3 questions would very much differ. So everyone keeps on saying buying is an emotional process. And I don't deny that. It is emotional. But there are ways you can anchor that down. And for me, I ask 3 questions that either I answer myself or the seller will answer for me. One is, how does this impact my personal brand? How does it impact my customers, both internally and externally? And how does it impact the consumer, both externally and internally? Those are the 3 questions I ask. And if a buyer cannot internally answer that question, he doesn't understand what he has in front of him. There's clarity is missing, total cost of ownership is missing. And to add to that, you can know an ROI just through a spreadsheet, but you might not understand the total cost of ownership. So what you said about ROI, yes, it should be a conversation for later. Volume should be a conversation for later. Anything that comes out to be transactional should be a conversation for later. Yes, it needs to be discussed, but it shouldn't be the first half of the discussions. It should be the last 1/3 of the conversation. Maybe just before the order is submitted, or maybe a week before you physically get an order. Is customer, consumer, and my brand.
Absolutely. And again, interestingly enough, this plays directly to the 3 jobs that every sale must satisfy: the functional job, the social and political job, and the emotional and personal job. If you do not, as a seller, understand that those are the three questions going through the buyer's mind and what they are trying to achieve with each of those, then you're automatically going to get stuck in the corridor between the first and the second room. And if you make it through there, you're never going to make it out of the third room where the allocation committee is approving the spend. Because the spend doesn't necessarily sit with procurement. For some of the bigger deals, the board and the investment committee will have to be involved. Procurement will influence that. And certainly within COVID, what I saw was procurement became the right hand of the CFO. And it became critically important to keep the business afloat. And we need to understand that those three jobs, functional, political, and emotional, are always buzzing away through the buyer's mind. And if you fail to understand that, then what you will do is you will trigger risk in the buyer's mind, and you will start creating anticipatory buyer's remorse, where the buyer imagines that they've made the decision to buy, and then it's gone wrong. And the political fallout on that falls on them. It could limit their career. If you're going to spend $10 million on a piece of software, you really don't want that to go wrong. If you're going to spend 100 million or $1 billion, you really don't want it to go wrong because it's kind of career limiting.
Yeah. Yeah. It goes back to what you initially said. What we're talking about. It goes back to just go talk to your procurement team as a seller, or buyers. Go talk to your sales team. When you start empathizing, when you start understanding that dynamic, and you can get this information internally, what we're talking about now becomes more bold. It becomes more relevant. You get more clarity, because at the end of the day, for a lot of stuff you're talking about now, I don't know. I don't have to worry about it. Like your KPIs, a salesperson's KPIs, that's not something that I'm a part of or I'm aware of.
It's not your problem.
Exactly. So, but likewise, we buyers also have KPIs, or the procurement team has KPIs, right? But there are lessons to be learned where if we start talking to each other, understanding each other, it helps then go outside, and it helps me then talking to my suppliers too, because that salesperson is having comparable issues that my internal salespeople are having. Most businesses operate fundamentally and structurally the same. KPIs are very, very common across companies.
I think what we've really come to the conclusion of here is that the first transaction is just that.
The cheapest.
But it's a test. It's the first real test of trust. Because I'm less interested in the first transaction. I'm far more interested in the third, fourth, fifth, 10th, 15th. Because as a seller, if I can find a way to create repeat business, referral business, expansion business, renewals, my cost of sale goes down. So your equivalent of total cost of ownership is massively reduced on our side because cost of goods sold is reduced. The time to a decision and time to cash is reduced. The cost of sale is reduced. Margin goes up. And one of the problems I see, and it's particularly prevalent over the last 40 years, it's got worse, is as private equity puts businesses under pressure to start showing, frankly, largely meaningless metrics. And that then filters down through the organization as quota pressure, quarter end nonsense, and time pressure as leverage. I remember when we spoke last time, you said something really interesting, which is when you put a clock over my head, I feel I'm at a disadvantage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all that's doing is creating buyer resistance, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So if your management is putting you under pressure to try and get a deal over the line, in order to meet your valuation target, or because you're going to IPO next year, or because the numbers are a bit behind, resist. Now, I know it's hard, but enlist your buyer to make it really clear that having weekly calls is not going to move things forward. Enlist your buyer as your ally and have them speak to your management if you have to. But for goodness sake, don't keep putting them under pressure. And I'm not saying that you take your eye off the ball. We've all heard the expression time kills deals. Well, so does haste. And haste, I think, is a bigger killer of deals. Because if you put I remember I was coaching one chap, and he was trying to sell to the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, whose mother had just died. And he was in a period of mourning. And the chief revenue officer was putting him under pressure to try and get this guy on the phone. It wasn't going to work. And in the end, it killed the deal because they lost trust. Now, you don't do that sort of thing. Buyers are human too.
You made a lot of good points, and I want to just mention a couple things. Some of my best sellers, guess how much we spent with them?
Nothing.
Exactly. It's nothing I could do. It's nothing they could do. They had the best total cost of ownership. The budget wouldn't allow it. And guess what? If someone needed those products or services, guess who would be the first person I would recommend? Not the current guy we're spending all the money with or whatnot. It's gonna be that guy that we spent no dollars with, $0 with in the last year. So again, do you want to be a one-time transactional seller or do you want a customer for life? And these sellers I'm talking about, they preferred a customer for life because I would say this: these are OEM dealers that are used to selling thousands of units per month. Guess how many units I had quoted? A handful, maybe two, but yet they want to do business with me. That's not volume. That's not price. That's a relationship. That's value. And that's when you, as a buyer and seller, when you work in that level, when you realize that somebody wants your business, not because of the volume or the money, but because of who you are, that's humanizing the process.
Well, I think it definitely humanizes it, but I think it's also a responsibility sellers have. Our job is not to make the transaction.
But
That's
is
a
it?
byproduct. That's a symptom. Our job is to empower the buyer to make the right decision for themselves, and if necessary, to walk away from a deal if it's wrong for either side. Because
But
if
does does a company allow that truly to happen? Because a counter to that, I've had it where I had the total cost of ownership. We wanted the trial. The company was like, nope, it's all or nothing, and they lost the deal.
Yeah, I get that. And often because of misguided leadership or the business model or the exit model, and the cash burn, then the company doesn't allow that. But you don't sell your integrity. You don't sell your reputation. And the problem is that if you mistreat a buyer, they may forgive you, but they're very unlikely to forget it, especially if it came back to bite them.
Hmm.
And if you're putting them under pressure in a way that makes them feel unsafe, the next time you pick up, the caller ID will tell you who they are, and you're going to put them straight through to voicemail, and they're going to spend their life chasing and being ghosted. And if you're experiencing that, chances are it's a reflection on how you've shown up, how you engaged, what you didn't do in terms of keeping your promises. These are all factors that last a lifetime. And I think far too few sellers really take ownership and responsibility for that. And instead of pushing back on their own management, they export the misery to the customer. And that's a really bad move.
And I noticed the other thing I noticed a lot now talking with more salespeople is you read it on LinkedIn a lot is they're trying to shift the blame to the buyer.
Yeah.
And it's like, is this really a buyer issue or is it a leadership issue? Just because we go quiet and we're digesting all the information we're getting doesn't mean you're not getting the business. It might not happen as quickly as you want it to, but reality has to sit in too. And as a seller, you have to be, I don't know, it's just you got to understand that we as buyers have, the political dynamic too. And we can only move so fast as well. And we have a budget as well. So understanding that and to your point, making sure your stakeholders understand that expectation. Don't let, when I talk to you, when I set the expectation, don't let it fall on deaf ears. Communicate that internally. Because what I think happens is a lot of times, I'll say, hey, man, this might take 6 months or a year before it gets sorted out. You go in and the first thing that leadership thinks is, oh, this is going to happen in the next 3 months. We're going to get this deal and it's going to be a $2 million source of revenue. No, it's just as important for buyers to align internally as it is for sellers to align internally. And that's part of having that alignment across the board. Because there's been a lot of cases where the seller and I were aligned, but his team wasn't. He thought the deal was going to happen a lot sooner. He thought the volumes were going to be a lot bigger. All the transactional stuff, they amplified and it wasn't warranted. No one told him that. They made assumptions.
Well, it's really interesting because I've just finished writing the manuscript for my book, which is all about how decisions flow through an organization, and not out of badness, not out of malice, not out of being incompetent. But more often than not, it's safer just to try and protect yourself. And so it tracks a deal going through over a period of time, and how decisions compound and create an environment where once it's in forecast, or once you're doing your deal review, then you're asked for a commit. Once you give a commit, then it goes into forecast. If something changes, it's very difficult to say actually something's changed. So what you do is you continue to fabricate it. And
Yeah,
when that happens across 100 salespeople, all of a sudden the CFO's
exponential.
forecast is basically hokum. And you end up coming in under quota. Then private equity kicks off, the board kicks off, and you see these problems occurring because no one intends the distortion, and every adjustment, tiny as it is, feels reasonable, and you can kind of defend it, and every emission is defensible as well. But what survives upward is not what was known. It's what could continue. And as a result, you start getting this ripple effect in the same way that with a traffic jam, certainly in the UK, the average speed of a traffic jam is 12 miles an hour going backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see this happen in institutional decision making all the time, whether it's buying, whether it's hiring, whether it's forecasting, whether it's marketing, and all of these things are interconnected.
The thing that sales needs to understand is the same thing is happening on the buyer end too. Our quota too. So if I'm engaging you, I see total cost of ownership. There's a perpetual savings in some fashion form, maybe not numerically, but something I can justify on my side that is going to help my KPIs. I have just as much skin in the game as you do as a salesperson. So don't be under the assumption that I'm not personally impacted too, or I'm trying to stall this thing out. Again, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that has to happen. The ball has to roll in one way to make it happen. And the slightest deviation, all of a sudden the customer changes his mind, or the consumer. All of a sudden, we don't have room for the inventory, or we have too much money invested in inventory. Whatever it might be, the dynamic shifts, and it's nothing the buyer, have control over. It's a business ecosystem that is shifting, that now stalled out the transaction from happening sooner than what it was going to happen, which then impacts you and your quota because you think it's going to hit this month when it might hit 6 months from now or a year from now. So again, we're all tied together. It's all on a rope. If I have a rope connected to you, all of a sudden I walk backwards, it's going to pull you forward, right?
Yeah, excellent. Ryan, look, we've come to time. I want to make one point. Procurement, when they are going through a purchase process, is typically spending anywhere between 20 and 250K to put together an RFP. That's average. And there is a huge amount of time and effort involved. They are justifiably peeved when salespeople try and bypass them. I know that we're taught most often, procurement is the enemy, but they are not. If you align yourself and ally yourself with a good strategic buyer, as Ryan's described, they can be the keys to the kingdom. And it's a mistake to ignore them. And it's definitely a mistake to upset them because they hold the purse strings and access to all the spend, and they speak to one another. So let's just finish on that. Do you speak to other procurement people about salespeople and suppliers?
We collaborate on ideas and concepts internally, other buyers. Obviously we have our team meetings and things like that. So yeah, we do. We share common practices. We sometimes help each other out in negotiations. I've been pulled into a lot of other category negotiations over my lifetime, and where I have to redevelop a new relationship, right? Because I'm now talking to their salesperson instead of someone I know or I build a relationship with. So to answer your question, yes, I spend more time with my stakeholders that I'm physically that are physically impacted by my decision or what I'm doing, my output, than I do with another buyer that has their own stakeholders that they have to focus on.
Well, I'm minded of a story of a CFO who was aggrieved by a salesperson, and he operated out of Atlanta. And there were 42 companies in Atlanta where the CFOs all used to get together, have dinners and drinks and so on. And that salesperson was effectively locked out of that market. So whilst you're working closely with your stakeholders, other buying functions, especially those with the purse strings, are going to be talking to other people in their subcategory of role. So be really careful. People have long memories, and whilst they may forgive you, they probably won't forget. And what you have to understand is that you need to be aware of what people are saying behind your back. Is it what you want them to, or is it not?
Build your
So,
brand.
on that note, first of all, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Secondly, how can people get hold of you?
So if you go on LinkedIn or I'm on Twitter and I do stuff on YouTube, just type in first to pitch. It's the number two, first to pitch or Ryan Burman. The company name is Pitch to Procure, like you alluded to earlier, but I'm trying to brand it as first to pitch, which is a methodology. On LinkedIn, I post an article once a month explaining the methodology, explaining to me what a good negotiation looks like, things like that, to help both buyers and sellers bridge that gap. You know, how to make an organic conversation versus it feeling like an interrogation or an awkward first date.
So, final question then. You've got a golden ticket and you can whisper in the ear of the idiot Ryan, age 23. What one bit of advice would you give him?
Yeah, understand people and build your brand because your reputation depends on it. It is your golden ticket to life. You know, there is no checkbox for life and living. And so it's a creative atmosphere and the best people I see are successful are creative people and that understand people, that understand other people.
Absolutely. Ryan Burman, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
This is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor Podcast. Understand this. Procurement isn't the enemy. It's the firewall. They're here not to block you. They're here to stop the business from getting hurt. And if you're a seller, the fastest way to get blocked isn't price, it's intent, it's ego, it's sales theater, trying to control the buyer or bypassing procurement like it's a nuisance. The truth is, the pitch is not the value. The value is what happens when things go wrong. Buyers don't wake up wanting a cheaper supplier. They wake up wanting fewer surprises, fewer escalations, no political landmines, no 2 a.m. emails. And if you want the keys to the kingdom, earn them. Show up relevant, co-create, and give the buyer what they need to sell internally when you're not in the room. And if you take one thing from this, the first transaction is not the win. The first transaction is the test of trust. Pass that test, and even if you don't get a deal, you can get a customer for life. So with that, happy selling, stay safe. Bye-bye.